Greetings, it's me again, and we're taking on this part 2 of the swing era, and just kind of let you know that this would have been a fun time to be out seeing the music and seeing people dancing. This is kind of a party time, I've got a little image I put in here. Okay, so dance styles, there was influx or influence of black style in popular American culture. And that's evident in the fact that there was a development of swing dance styles that paralleled the swing music. The Lindy Hop was a very popular dance, and it was developed by dancers at the Savoy Ballroom in Harlem, New York during the late 1920s. And it was named in honor of Charles Lindbergh's solo transatlantic flight in 1927. So they named it after a current event that was on everyone's mind, the Lindy Hop. And we have a video of that in the course shell. And I ask you to be sure and watch all the musical examples and videos, please. The Lindy differed from dances of the early 1920s, and we're talking about dances like the bunny, the hug, the turkey trot, and the foxtrot in these ways. Older dances emphasize a bouncy up and down movement, whereas the Lindy was smoother with more fluid horizontal movements, more side to side. Lindy provided for improvisation, including what we call the breakaway, where dancers would part company and dance solo and exhibit their dancing skill. And this was somewhat improvisational. You can kind of make a comparison with some of the improvisation that you see in hip-hop dance today, Clothing of the dancers matched the formal aesthetic of the new ballrooms. Loose clothes were hip in appearance and suited the acrobatic moves of the Lindy Hop. Harlem. New York's Harlem was famous for nightclubs and dance halls. And naming the Savoy Ballroom, the Cotton Club, and the Apollo Theater. Those are really famous places to see, famous nightclubs to see swing music. These were originally attended by European immigrants, and in the late 1920s, Harlem was the home to well-educated and prosperous black middle class. Through Harlem, black styles and sensibilities entered American culture in the 1920s through the 1940s. Black and tan nightclubs like the Cotton Club were operated by Italian and Jewish mobsters. The Cotton Club audiences were predominantly white, people with an interest in jazz and cosmopolitan black culture. When we speak of black and tan, that means that there is white and black people in the establishment. The Cotton Club started out that there were white audiences and black performers, but eventually they did allow the blacks as part of the audience as well. And tourists were another part of the attraction. So people would come from other countries and they'd want to see these clubs, these nightclubs. More about Harlem. The most successful dance orchestras at the Cotton Club were led by these two bands, Duke Ellington and Cab Calloway. And they supplied music for stage acts featuring scantily clad brown beauties, men in ape costumes and jungle scenery. So they were trying to add more environment to these nightclubs. In addition to the great jazz music, there was sometimes little skits put on. Black and white in the swing era. Take a look at some of the differences. The swing era was a step forward in cultural communication across racial boundaries. Blacks attended concerts by white bands. Whites imitated black culture with a greater passion than ever before. And it wasn't really a relationship of equality. Few dance bands were racially integrated. I know Benny Goodman was one of the first to actually put black and white members into his bands. Black dance bands faced economic and social disadvantages. 1935 to 1945, the top 4 bands led by white musicians sold a total of 292 top 10 records, and 65 of those were #1 hits. The top 4 black swing orchestras only scored about 32 top 10 hits, 3 of which made it to #1 on the charts. So, whether it was the audience response, but part of it was the industry itself didn't allow for as many opportunities, the music industry itself. So those figures, they reflect the differences in the economic status between the whites and the black bands. Black musicians had difficulty getting equal airtime on radio. Black musicians had trouble getting their records included on coin-operated jukeboxes. Features of big band swing music. Differences between swing music and dance music of the 1920s and 1910s and 1920s. So we're going to do a little comparison. What was different about the swing bands and the swing style? Call and response is a characteristic of swing and of jazz. A characteristic feature and central to African American musical traditions as well. Gospel music and blues includes call and response. You can see call and response in churches in general, where the leader will sing something and the congregation would answer back. The late 1920s, black dance bands and arrangers incorporated the principle into ensemble writing, this call and response principle. They treated the brass and the reed instruments as separate sections, setting them off against one another. So that means they might have the brass, the trumpets play something, then have the saxes answer it, put up this call and response between the sections. And it forms sort of like conversations between sections in the bands. Getting specific about the rhythmic feel of swing, 1920s music featured the 2-beat rhythms with the erect postures and up and down movements of the foxtrot. So those Dixieland styles and Chicago styles of the 1920s, they had more of a 2-beat feel. With swing, the rhythmic feel was more of a continuous flow, and they accented a 4-beat feel rather than just a 2-beat. With swing, the rhythmic feel was more continuous. We're saying the flowing effect created by the bass playing on all 4 beats in a measure rather than just the first and third beats. A technique referred to as walking bass. We do have an example of the difference between the 2-beat feel and the 4-beat feel labeled in the course shell as part of our listening. So be sure and listen to that, please. More on the rhythm. Drums played the swing feel by sounding all 4 beats on the bass drum, a technique called 4 on the floor, and playing a regular tapping pattern on the cymbal, on the ride cymbal. That's my little imitation of the ride cymbal there. Okay, guitarists played on every beat, emphasizing what they called the four on the floor. And the swing groove also depended on accenting the backbeat. The backbeat is beats 2 and 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Backbeat could be supplied by the rhythm section or the horns. The combination of a steady fluid pulse with an accent or kind of a push on every other beat creates the swing feel. So we're just trying to describe what's unique about swing. Okay, so everything has a beginning and an ending. So now we're going to talk about the end of swing, the death of swing, if you will. And so the Second World War really did have a big part in the end of the swing era. And so the draft was one of the reasons. Musicians themselves were pulled out of bands to serve their country. Bands raided each other, so it became an element of survival. And so some of the members of one band were going to audition for another band to fill these vacancies. Transportation was difficult. There were gas shortages. Travel was difficult to night spots and outside of city limits. There were rubber shortages. If there's rubber shortages, there's going to be tire shortages. If there's tire shortages, cars are going to be unable to travel. Midnight curfew, that was another reason. 20% amusement tax. Yeah, these are hard times for everybody, but for the swing era. Good players did not have to travel, so that meant that the people that had the best jobs, they were going to stay in one area. Other people were going to have to travel a lot more, and that was a hardship for a big band. Supply and demand, yeah, so salaries escalated and music deteriorated. The dismantling of urban and interurban railways, that was another reason for the end of the swing era. People couldn't travel by railways. Yeah, railways. And restrictive formats, racism, ASCAP. Yeah, that's an association that controls the rights of songs. The swing era lasted almost exactly a decade, ending almost as quickly as it had begun. By the close of 1946, many of the top bands in the country had either broken up or formed a smaller, more economical unit. And the sudden decline of big bands was related to changes in the music business as well as shifts in popular musical tastes. So R&B was coming along, and in the next decade, rock and roll would actually come along.